I'm Cassandra Cassie Mitchell, 34 years old, and I've been dreading our annual family Thanksgiving dinner at my parents' suburban home for weeks. But nothing prepared me for the moment my mother raised her glass and announced to everyone, "Heather has always been the provider in this family. We're so blessed to have her." The table fell silent as all eyes turned to me, waiting for the hurt to register on my face. Instead, I smiled and said one word: perfect. Their shocked expressions told me everything. This was the moment I'd been waiting for. The perfect opening to expose 20 years of family secrets, lies, and betrayal. Let me take you back to where it all began. Before I dive into this story, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your location in the comments. And don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever dealt with family drama. Trust me, you'll want to stick around for how this all unfolds. Growing up in the Mitchell household meant understanding one fundamental truth. Heather was perfect, and I was not. My sister, 4 years my senior, could do no wrong in our parents' eyes. She was the golden child with her straight-A report cards, popularity at school, and effortless charm that won over every adult she encountered. I was the afterthought, the one who could never quite measure up no matter how hard I tried. Our childhood bedrooms told the story perfectly. Heather's room was a showcase of pristine pink decor, updated regularly to match her evolving tastes. Mine remained the same pale yellow from infancy, with furniture that had seen better days before I was even born. When I asked about redecorating at 13, my mother sighed about budget constraints. 2 months later, Heather's room got a complete makeover because she needs a proper study environment for high school. The disparity in our treatment became impossible to ignore when we turned 16. For Heather's 16th birthday, my parents organized a surprise party with 50 guests and presented her with a brand new red Toyota Corolla with a giant bow on top. My mother justified the extravagance by saying, "Heather needs reliable transportation for all her volunteer work and academic commitments." My 16th birthday, I received a used bicycle my father had refurbished. "It's practical," my mother explained when she saw my face fall. "And good exercise, too. You could stand to lose a few pounds anyway." My father awkwardly patted my shoulder and added, "We just don't have the budget for anything more right now, Cassie." Curiously, they found the budget for Heather's spring break trip to Europe 3 months later. College preparations widened the gap further. My parents hired private SAT tutors for Heather and drove her to visit campuses across the country. They created a dedicated college fund that covered her tuition at an expensive private university. When my turn came, my mother handed me brochures for the local community college. "It's sensible to start small," she advised. "College might not be for everyone anyway." Despite this, I maintained solid grades and worked after school to save for college myself. I poured my heart into an essay for a competitive scholarship, spending weeks perfecting it with my English teacher's guidance. The night before the submission deadline, I printed the final version and left it on my desk. The first betrayal came like a thunderclap. I discovered Heather had taken my essay, made minor modifications, and submitted it under her name. She won the scholarship I desperately needed. When I confronted her, tears streaming down my face, she simply shrugged. "I improved it. Besides, I need it for my resume more than you do." When I brought this to my parents, expecting justice, my father awkwardly cleared his throat. "Are you sure you didn't misunderstand, Cassie? Heather said she just helped you organize your thoughts better." My mother was less diplomatic. "Don't be ridiculous. Heather was just trying to help you. She's always looking out for you. If she submitted something similar, it's because your original work needed improving." That night, alone in my room, something shifted inside me. The hurt calcified into determination. If my family wouldn't see my worth, I would find others who would. I would build my own path without their approval or support. The seed of resentment was planted, but from it grew something unexpected: true independence. I worked multiple jobs, saved every penny, and applied for every scholarship I could find. I stopped sharing my achievements at home, learning that they would only be diminished or attributed to luck. While Heather continued to be celebrated for minimal effort, I quietly built the foundation for my escape. "You've always been so secretive," my mother would comment with disapproval. Not open and honest like your sister. The irony of her statement was not lost on me. But I had learned my lesson. In the Mitchell family, the truth was whatever Heather said it was. And I was done playing a rigged game. By 23, I had graduated from State University with a degree in marketing and communications, earned through scholarships and part-time jobs. No family members attended my graduation ceremony. Heather had a minor cold that weekend, and my parents stayed home to care for her. I told myself it didn't matter as I accepted my diploma alone, surrounded by classmates embraced by proud families. I landed an entry-level position at Meridian, a prestigious marketing firm in Chicago. The starting salary was modest, but the opportunity was golden. Meanwhile, Heather had used our father's country club connections to secure a mid-level position at a financial services company despite having minimal qualifications for the role. My first year at Meridian was brutal. I arrived first and left last, volunteered for the projects nobody wanted, and studied industry trends during my commute. While my peers socialized after work, I was developing campaign concepts and improving my technical skills. My social life consisted of occasional video calls with college friends who were increasingly busy with their own lives. 3 months in, I caught the attention of Barbara Wells, a senior director known for her brilliance and exacting standards. After I presented a particularly thorough analysis during a team meeting, she asked me to stay behind. "You work harder than anyone here," she observed, studying me with sharp eyes. "But you're not just a workhorse. You've got good instincts. The question is whether you've got the confidence to match." Under Barbara's mentorship, I refined my approach, learning to trust my creative instincts while backing them with data. She pushed me relentlessly, but also defended my ideas in meetings with upper management when they had merit. For the first time, I had someone in my corner who valued me for my actual capabilities. My breakthrough came 8 months in, when a major client was dissatisfied with our campaign proposals. Desperate, the team lead gave me a shot at presenting my alternative concept. My campaign idea, which connected the client's traditional values with contemporary aesthetics, won them over completely. 2 weeks later, I received my first promotion and a small team to manage. Excited about finally having something impressive to share, I called my parents. My mother's response was tepid at best. "Marketing? Isn't that just making ads?" "Well, I suppose it's nice you're doing well. Heather just closed a major portfolio for her investors. Nearly 7 figures. Now that's really making a difference." The familiar sting returned, but this time it was dulled by my growing professional confidence. I knew my work had value, regardless of my family's assessment. The second major betrayal came during a rare visit home for Christmas. While helping my mother in the kitchen, I overheard Heather speaking to our aunt in the living room. "Cassie? Oh, she's doing okay, I guess. Got some job-making advertisements. Between us, though, she's struggling. Called me last month in tears about how she can't handle the pressure. I'm worried about her stability, you know? She's always been the fragile one." I froze, dish towel in hand. No such conversation had ever occurred. I hadn't spoken to Heather in months, and certainly never called her for emotional support. When I confronted her later, she brushed it off as a misunderstanding. "I was just trying to explain why you never come home. I didn't want the family to think you don't care about us." My mother, overhearing, immediately took Heather's side. "Don't be so sensitive, Cassie. Your sister was just looking out for you, as always. You should be grateful someone's explaining your absence to the family." That night, I had a revelation as I lay in my childhood bed. My family would never see me clearly. They had cast me as the less capable, less stable, less successful Mitchell daughter, and no evidence would change that narrative. Heather needed me to play this role to maintain her own position, and my parents were too invested in their perfect daughter to question her. I decided to change my strategy. Success wouldn't just be my escape, it would be my armor and eventually, if necessary, my weapon. But I would keep that success largely hidden from my family, giving them only glimpses that they could easily dismiss. I would let them underestimate me until the perfect moment to reveal the truth. 3 years into my career at Meridian, I had established myself as a rising star. My campaigns consistently outperformed projections, and I had developed a reputation for turning around struggling accounts. I managed a team of 5, having earned a reputation as demanding but fair. Barbara continued to mentor me, though now we were more colleagues than teacher and student. Then came the offer that would change everything. The opportunity to lead Meridian's new digital division in New York, with a substantial salary increase and equity options. The position would put me on track for executive leadership and give me unprecedented creative control. It was everything I had worked for, a chance to truly build something of my own. When I called my parents to share the news, their response was predictably deflating. New York? My mother's voice held more concern than pride. But it's so dangerous and expensive. Are you sure that's wise, Cassie? You've always been impulsive, not thoughtful like your sister. My father chimed in. New York will eat you alive, kiddo. Those high-powered executives aren't going to go easy on you. Maybe you should consider something closer to home. Heather's firm has a New York office. My mother added brightly. I'm sure she could put in a good word for you there if you're set on moving. Something more suitable to your experience level. I kept my voice steady. Thanks, but I've already accepted the position. I start next month. The silence spoke volumes before my mother sighed. Well, I suppose you know best. Though I do wish you'd consulted with Heather first. She knows the business world so much better. I had long stopped expecting their support, but their consistent undermining still stung. I reminded myself that their opinion no longer defined my worth. I had Barbara's confidence, my team's respect, and most importantly, my own determination. 2 days before my planned move, I received a call from my new boss in New York, Michael Winters. Cassandra, he began, awkwardly, I just had a rather unusual conversation with someone claiming to be your sister. She was quite concerned about your readiness for this position and offered to provide context about your background. I assured her our hiring decisions are based on performance and potential, not family consultations. My blood ran cold. This was betrayal number 3, and it crossed a line I couldn't ignore. Heather had actually tried to interfere with my career, potentially sabotaging the biggest opportunity of my life. I drove to Heather's house immediately, fury making my hands shake on the steering wheel. When she answered the door, her surprise at seeing me quickly morphed into a practiced smile. Cassie! What a nice surprise! I was just about to... You called my new boss. My voice was low and controlled, despite the rage coursing through me. You tried to undermine me professionally. Heather's expression shifted to innocent confusion. I was just trying to help. I know people in New York, and I wanted to make sure they understood your situation. You should be thanking me for looking out for you. My situation? You mean my rising career and proven track record? The one you know nothing about because you're too busy fabricating stories about me being unstable? I stepped closer. Stay out of my professional life. Don't call my colleagues. Don't use my name. Don't pretend to help me ever again. Her face hardened. You're being dramatic as always. This is exactly why I wanted to talk to your boss. You clearly can't handle pressure without overreacting. That was the breaking point. I realized in that moment that Heather wasn't just favored. She was actively working to keep me in my assigned role as the lesser sister. My success threatened her identity as the family star, and she would sabotage me to maintain the hierarchy. The next day, I moved to New York with 2 suitcases and a determination to cut most contact with my family. I limited our interaction to brief calls on holidays and major occasions, deflecting personal questions and keeping conversations superficial. When they asked about my work, I gave vague responses that allowed them to maintain their narrative of my modest career. New York tested me in ways I hadn't anticipated. The pace was relentless, the competition fierce, and my imposter syndrome occasionally crippling. I struggled to adjust to leading a division rather than just a team, making several painful mistakes in those first few months. But I persevered, working 16-hour days and rebuilding my professional network from scratch. I sought out mentors, joined industry groups, and immersed myself in the city's marketing community. 6 months in, I landed Arcturus, a client everyone had considered impossible to secure. Their campaign became Meridian's most awarded work that year, and suddenly I was no longer struggling to prove myself. For 4 years, I maintained minimal contact with my family, brief calls on holidays, generic birthday cards, and occasional text messages. I declined invitations to family gatherings with plausible work excuses, sending lavish gifts in my absence that went largely unacknowledged. This distance was my armor, allowing me to focus entirely on building my career without the constant undermining of my confidence. And build I did. My division at Meridian expanded from a team of 7 to a department of 32, generating nearly a third of the company's revenue. I developed a reputation for innovative campaigns that blended digital strategy with emotional storytelling, winning industry recognition and attracting high-profile clients. At 31, I was promoted to Vice President of Marketing, becoming one of the youngest executives in the company's history. During this time, I met Ryan Cooper at an industry conference where we were both speaking. Unlike the competitive sharks I usually encountered, Ryan was collaborative and genuinely interested in my approaches to campaign development. As the founder of a boutique creative agency, he had the freedom to take risks that my corporate position sometimes limited. Our professional relationship evolved into friendship and eventually romance. Ryan was the first person who seemed to see me completely, appreciating both my ambition and the vulnerability I usually kept hidden. When I finally shared the full story of my family dynamics, he didn't offer platitudes or dismiss my experiences. Instead, he expressed outrage on my behalf, while respecting my decision to maintain distance rather than confrontation. With my career thriving and personal life finally balanced, I took another major step, purchasing a 2-bedroom apartment in Manhattan. It was a symbol of everything I'd achieved on my own, a sanctuary where my worth wasn't questioned or compared. The day I signed the papers, I allowed myself a rare moment of pride, recognizing how far I'd come from the insecure girl who'd been told college might not be for everyone. Shortly after Ryan proposed, my parents requested we visit for a weekend, insisting they wanted to meet my fiancé. Against my better judgment, I agreed. Heather would be there with her husband James, creating the perfect facade of family unity for Ryan to witness. The visit began with the expected tension masked as politeness. My mother fussed over Heather's children while merely acknowledging my engagement. My father asked Ryan countless questions about his business but showed little interest in our relationship. I had prepared Ryan for this dynamic, but seeing his stunned expression throughout the day confirmed that reality exceeded his expectations. The fourth betrayal came during dinner when the conversation turned to business connections. Heather casually mentioned, "I'm still so glad I introduced Cassie to Warren Phillips. He's been such a valuable connection for her career." I nearly choked on my wine. Warren Phillips was a major client I had secured through months of careful strategy and persistence. Heather had never even met him, let alone facilitated an introduction. Actually, I corrected calmly. I met Warren at the Digital Marketing Summit in 2018. "We've never discussed him before, Heather." My mother immediately jumped in. "Cassie, don't be rude. Heather distinctly told us how she connected you two through her finance network. You must be misremembering." Ryan watched this exchange with widening eyes as my father nodded in agreement with my mother. The gaslighting was so seamless, so practiced, that for a moment I questioned my own memory, despite knowing with absolute certainty that Heather's claim was fabricated. Later that night in our hotel room, Ryan was uncharacteristically quiet. "Is it always like that?" he finally asked. "They just rewrite reality to make your sister the hero of every story?" "Always," I confirmed, the familiar heaviness settling in my chest. This was actually a relatively mild example. He took my hands in his. "I knew it was bad from what you'd told me, but seeing it in action. Cassie, it's not just favoritism. It's systematic erasure of your accomplishments. How have you not completely cut them off?" It was a question I'd asked myself many times. The truth was complicated. A mixture of lingering hope for change, cultural expectations about family obligations, and a strange sense that someday this would all reach a breaking point that would finally force acknowledgement of the truth. "I've considered it," I admitted, "but I think I'm waiting for something. Not their approval anymore, but recognition, admission. Something that validates that I'm not crazy for feeling this way." That weekend strengthened my resolve to build such undeniable success that even my family couldn't diminish it. I began documenting everything: achievements, conversations, betrayals. creating an irrefutable record of both my accomplishments and the pattern of undermining I'd experienced. It wasn't about revenge, but about truth. And when the moment came to present that truth, I would be prepared. Through industry connections, I began hearing concerning rumors about Heather's professional activities. Initially, I dismissed them as competitor gossip. Despite our difficult relationship, I couldn't imagine Heather risking her career with truly unethical behavior. But when a colleague mentioned aggressive investment strategies at my sister's firm during a casual lunch, my curiosity was piqued. Discreetly, I began investigating. Public records showed Heather's firm had received several warnings from regulatory bodies regarding their representations to investors. Her own client portfolio showed suspiciously consistent returns that outpaced market performance, even during downturns. A classic red flag for financial manipulation. The picture that emerged was troubling. Heather appeared to be operating a sophisticated version of a Ponzi scheme, using new investor funds to create the illusion of returns for existing clients while skimming substantial fees. She marketed herself as having proprietary investment strategies, but the documentation suggested smoke and mirrors rather than legitimate methods. The fifth betrayal blindsided me completely. Jonathan Mercer, a valuable client I'd worked with for years, called me directly one afternoon. "Cassie, I'm a bit confused about something," he began hesitantly. "Your sister contacted me about an exclusive investment opportunity. She mentioned you had recommended her services specifically for high net worth individuals like me. Is this something you're affiliated with?" My stomach dropped. "Jonathan, I never recommended my sister to you or anyone else. We don't have a professional relationship of any kind." A painful conversation followed, revealing that Heather had been systematically contacting my clients, leveraging our family connection to establish credibility. She had even created marketing materials implying a partnership between our firms that absolutely did not exist. I immediately arranged to meet her at a neutral location, an upscale cafe where neither of us would make a scene. When confronted with evidence of her solicitations, Heather didn't even attempt denial. "It's just business, Cassie," she shrugged, stirring her latte casually. "You wouldn't understand the finance world. These people have more money than they know what to do with anyway. You're using my professional relationships to run what looks suspiciously like a scam," I countered, keeping my voice low despite my anger. "You're risking my reputation along with your own." Her expression hardened. "Always so dramatic. This is why I've had to look out for you all these years. You see everything as some personal attack. Stay away from my clients," I warned, "or I'll have no choice but to report your activities to the appropriate authorities." Heather's laugh held no humor. "Who do you think Mom and Dad would believe if it came to that? The stable provider, or the jealous younger sister who's always resented my success? Please." Further investigation revealed the extent of Heather's financial house of cards. While presenting an image of affluence, luxury car, expensive vacations, private schools for her children, she was deeply in debt. Credit card statements accidentally forwarded to my parents' house, which I was visiting when they arrived, showed she was barely making minimum payments on multiple maxed-out accounts. Yet our parents remained oblivious, still treating Heather as the financially savvy daughter. When I cautiously raised concerns about some of Heather's investment claims during a phone call with my father, his dismissal was immediate. "Your sister understands finance at a level you don't, Cassie. These sophisticated investment strategies might seem unusual to outsiders, but Heather knows what she's doing. Frankly, your concern comes across as professional jealousy." I faced an ethical dilemma. Report my sister's increasingly problematic activities to regulators, potentially destroying her career and damaging our family, or remain silent and potentially allow more people to be harmed financially. I chose a middle path, documenting everything meticulously while implementing protective measures for my own clients and reputation. I issued a formal notice to Heather through my company's legal department, prohibiting her from claiming any association with me or my firm. I also quietly reached out to those of my contacts she had approached, clarifying that I had no involvement with her investment offers. Many thanked me for the warning, some sharing that they'd already invested based partly on my perceived endorsement. I couldn't tell them to withdraw their funds without making accusations. I wasn't yet ready to formalize, but I had planted seeds of caution. Meanwhile, I continued gathering evidence, sensing that Heather's scheme would eventually collapse under its own weight. When it did, I wanted to ensure my professional reputation remained untarnished. The documentation wasn't just for potential legal protection. It was another piece in the comprehensive record I was building of Heather's betrayals and our family's enabling behavior. My grandmother Catherine had always been different from the rest of the family. She noticed things others missed, including the disparate treatment between Heather and me. During my childhood visits to her small house by the lake, she would listen attentively to my stories and achievements, offering the genuine praise my parents withheld. "You've got a spark, Cassandra," she would tell me. "Don't let anyone dim it." When she passed away peacefully in her sleep at 92, I grieved not just the loss of her, but the loss of the only family member who consistently saw my worth. I flew home for the funeral, bracing myself for the familiar family dynamics while mourning in my own quiet way. After the service, the family gathered at my parents' house where Mr. Jennings, grandmother's attorney, informed us she had left a surprisingly substantial inheritance. Apparently, my quiet, frugal grandmother had made some wise investments decades ago that had grown significantly. The estate included her lakeside property, a stock portfolio worth nearly $800,000, and various personal items of both financial and sentimental value. Mr. Jennings explained that grandmother had left equal shares to Heather and me, with specific instructions that we each had freedom to manage our portions independently. I was touched by this final act of equity from the woman who had always treated me fairly. 2 weeks later, as I was preparing to return to New York, my parents called a family meeting. Heather arrived with a portfolio of documents and a sympathetic expression that immediately put me on alert. "We need to discuss grandmother's estate," my father began awkwardly. "There have been some developments." Heather took over smoothly. "I've been going through grandmother's papers with Mr. Jennings, and we've discovered some important changes to her wishes." She slid a document across the table. Grandmother amended her will in her final months. She gave me power of attorney and adjusted the distribution of assets. The sixth betrayal was laid out in black and white before me. According to these new documents, Heather would receive 70% of the estate and would manage my 30% in my best interest until certain conditions were met. Those conditions included vague references to demonstrated financial responsibility that would be determined by a trustee, Heather herself. "This can't be right," I said, scanning the papers with increasing disbelief. Grandmother was very clear about her wishes when we spoke last Christmas. My mother's expression was a practiced blend of concern and resignation. "Your grandmother worried about you, Cassie. She knew you've always been impulsive with money." "Impulsive? I've never asked any of you for financial help. I bought my own apartment. I've built my entire career independently." The injustice burned, but I kept my voice level. "Did either of you actually discuss this with grandmother directly?" My father shifted uncomfortably. "Heather kept us informed of their conversations. Your grandmother wanted to ensure the money was handled responsibly." I looked at Heather, who met my gaze with serene confidence. "I'm just honoring her wishes, Cassie. I know this might feel unfair, but I'm only thinking about what's best for everyone." In that moment, I realized how perfectly Heather had manipulated the situation. Our grandmother had been increasingly confused in her final months, sometimes mixing up decades and people during our phone conversations. If Heather had presented herself as acting in my interest, grandmother might have signed documents without fully understanding their implications. "I'd like to speak with Mr. Jennings myself," I stated calmly. "He's very busy," Heather responded quickly. "Besides, all the paperwork is finalized. Fighting this would just drain the estate with legal fees." I pretended to accept the situation, nodding reluctantly while my mind raced. "I understand. If that's what grandmother wanted, then I respect her decision." The relief on my parents' faces was palpable. They had clearly dreaded a confrontation. Heather's smile held a hint of triumph that only I could recognize. That night, instead of flying back to New York, I drove to Mr. Jennings' small office in the neighboring town. His surprised expression when I walked in confirmed my suspicion that he hadn't expected to see me. "Miss Mitchell, I wasn't aware you were planning to stop by. I have some questions about my grandmother's estate, I said, sitting down without invitation, particularly about the amendments to her will. Over the next hour, I carefully probed for information. Mr. Jennings was professional but uncomfortable, especially when I asked specific questions about when and how grandmother had communicated her changed wishes. He admitted he hadn't personally witnessed her signing the amendments. Heather had brought the documents to him already signed, with a witness he didn't know personally. After leaving his office, I drove to the assisted living facility where grandmother had spent her final months. The staff remembered me from my visits and were willing to talk. Through careful conversations, I discovered that Heather had visited grandmother frequently in her final weeks, always bringing paperwork and always ensuring no staff remained in the room. A sympathetic nurse shared that after these visits, grandmother had sometimes seemed distressed, once asking her, "Did I do something wrong?" Cassie wouldn't want this. Most significantly, I located grandmother's original attorney. She had changed to Mr. Jennings only in her final months, at Heather's recommendation. The original will, dated just 18 months before her death, confirmed my understanding: equal distribution with independent control for both sisters. I also discovered that my parents had been aware of this original will. They had actively supported the changes, believing Heather more financially responsible despite having no evidence of my supposed irresponsibility. They had allowed Heather to manipulate our grandmother without intervention, perhaps even encouraging it. Armed with this evidence, I consulted a probate attorney in New York who specialized in contested wills. She advised me that I had a strong case for undue influence but warned that family will contests were emotionally destructive and often Pyrrhic victories. I considered my options carefully. Challenging the will immediately would create an irrevocable family rupture and potentially drag grandmother's name through a messy legal battle. The alternative was to secure the evidence but wait, adding this betrayal to my documented collection and planning for a more comprehensive revelation when the time was right. I chose strategic patience. I had the original will safely stored with my attorney, statements from the nursing staff recorded, and a timeline of Heather's suspicious activities documented. This inheritance betrayal was perhaps the most personal, involving not just my parents' perpetual favoritism but the exploitation of my beloved grandmother's diminished capacity in her final days. The money itself wasn't what mattered. I was financially secure without it. What cut deeply was the violation of grandmother's true wishes and the manipulation of her genuine love for me. This betrayal would not go unaddressed. But I would wait for the perfect moment when the full pattern of deception could be revealed at once. 2 years passed. At 34, I had been promoted to executive director at Meridian, overseeing 3 divisions and reporting directly to the CEO. Ryan and I had married in a small ceremony in the Berkshires. No family attended after my mother's last-minute medical emergency that mysteriously resolved itself the day after our wedding. We bought a brownstone in Brooklyn, creating a warm, honest home environment I'd never experienced growing up. Meanwhile, economic headwinds had begun affecting markets. Investment firms promising unrealistic returns were facing increased scrutiny, and clients were growing wary. It was in this environment that Heather's carefully constructed financial facade began to crumble. The first sign came through an unexpected phone call from my father one Tuesday evening. His voice, usually confident and slightly dismissive when speaking to me, held an unfamiliar edge of panic. "Cassie, we might have a situation," he began without preamble. "Have you spoken to your sister recently?" "Not in months," I replied truthfully. "Why?" He hesitated. "Some of her investors are having trouble accessing their funds. Your mother and I put a significant amount into her managed accounts, and we're concerned." The extent of the problem emerged gradually over subsequent conversations. My parents had not only invested their retirement savings with Heather, but had actually remortgaged their paid-off home of 30 years to give her additional funds to invest. Now, promised returns weren't materializing, and withdrawal requests were being met with excuses and delays. Did she provide regular statements? Documentation of where the money was invested? I asked, already knowing the likely answer. "Of course," my father responded defensively. "But they're quite technical. Heather explained that her strategies are proprietary and the details are necessarily complex. Translation: they had received impressive-looking papers with numbers that showed money growing, but provided no substantive information about actual investments. Classic signs of a scheme now collapsing under redemption requests it couldn't fulfill. The seventh betrayal hit me like a physical blow when my mother called the following week, her voice small and frightened. "Your father and I might lose the house, Cassie. The bank called about missed payments on the mortgage." "I thought Heather was handling those payments from your investment returns," I said, already suspecting the truth. "She was supposed to be," my mother admitted. "But apparently there's been some confusion. The thing is, she told us you had advised her on a special investment opportunity that temporarily tied up the funds. She said you assured her it would pay off tremendously by year's end." The audacity was breathtaking. Heather had lost our parents' money and was now blaming me, someone she knew had no involvement whatsoever in her business. Even more staggering was that my parents had apparently believed this transparent lie without ever thinking to confirm it with me directly. "Mom, I've never given Heather financial advice of any kind. We barely speak, and when we do, it's never about investments. You know this." The silence on the line spoke volumes. She didn't know that, or rather, she had chosen to believe Heather's version of reality over what should have been obvious. "Well," she finally said, her voice regaining its familiar dismissive tone, "Heather must have misunderstood something you said. She's under tremendous pressure, you know, managing so many important portfolios." The family tension reached a breaking point during a conference call with my parents, Heather, and her husband James. Heather maintained the fiction that market forces had created temporary liquidity issues that would soon resolve. When I asked pointed questions about specific investments and returns, she deflected with financial jargon designed to confuse rather than clarify. The leveraged positions in the offshore vehicles are simply experiencing administrative delays in repatriation, she explained smoothly. The underlying assets remain strong. This was nonsense, and from James's uncomfortable expression, he knew it too. My father nodded as if this explained everything, while my mother looked relieved to have an explanation she could repeat to friends asking about their financial situation. After exhausting my patience with this charade, I made an offer I knew would be revealing. "I can help with the mortgage payments until this resolves," I said, "but I'll need complete transparency, full documentation of all investments, statements from the actual institutions holding the funds, and a forensic accounting of where every dollar has gone." The panic that flashed across Heather's face confirmed what I already suspected. No such documentation existed because the investments didn't exist. My parents' discomfort suggested they recognized the same, but weren't ready to acknowledge it. "That won't be necessary," Heather responded quickly, "and frankly, it would be inappropriate for you to have access to confidential client information." "Then I can help Mom and Dad directly," I countered. "I'll make their mortgage payments, but the loan will be between us, with no involvement from you." My mother jumped in before Heather could respond. "We couldn't possibly accept charity from you, Cassie. Heather has always handled our finances. She just needs a little time to sort this out." The word charity stung. My offer of legitimate help was dismissed as beneath their dignity, while Heather's empty promises were still treated as reliable. But I persisted, eventually establishing a private arrangement with my parents' bank. They believed my parents were making the payments, while in reality, I was covering them to prevent foreclosure. Even as their financial situation deteriorated, my parents maintained the fiction that Heather would resolve everything. Meanwhile, I discovered that regulatory authorities had begun investigating her firm's practices, with several clients filing complaints alleging misrepresentation and fraud. When an investigator contacted me for information, I provided only factual responses, neither protecting Heather nor actively working to incriminate her. The truth would emerge regardless of my involvement, and I wanted no part in either enabling or avenging. Justice would take its course through proper channels. As the walls closed in around Heather's scheme, I methodically prepared for the inevitable confrontation. I organized my documentation chronologically, added the evidence of her financial misdeeds, and waited for the moment when denial would no longer be possible. when my family would be forced to see the truth I had known for years. That moment arrived with an invitation to Thanksgiving dinner at my parents' home, the first such gathering in nearly 3 years. "We really want the whole family together," my mother insisted, an unusual urgency in her voice. Ryan was skeptical, but I accepted immediately, recognizing the opportunity for what it was. The stage was set for a reckoning 2 decades in the making. November arrived with biting cold and the weight of anticipation. Ryan and I packed our car with overnight bags and a carefully organized portfolio containing the evidence I had methodically gathered over years. As we drove to my parents' suburban home, I felt strangely calm, the kind of clarity that comes with absolute certainty. "Are you sure you're ready for this?" Ryan asked, glancing at me as we turned onto the familiar street of my childhood. "We can still turn around." I squeezed his hand. "I've been preparing for this moment for 20 years. It's time for the truth." My parents' house looked smaller than I remembered, the holiday decorations a bit less precise than in past years. Financial strain was evident in subtle ways. The driveway needed resurfacing, the gutters were clogged with leaves, and the holiday wreath looked worn from previous seasons. My mother greeted us with brittle cheerfulness, her eyes darting anxiously as she hugged me briefly before turning her full attention to Ryan. "So wonderful to have you both here. Heather and James are already inside with the children." The living room was a tableau of forced normalcy. Heather's children playing a board game on the floor, James making awkward small talk with my father, Heather arranging appetizers with the precision of someone avoiding more important matters. The tension was palpable beneath the holiday pleasantries. Dinner itself was a masterclass in avoidance. My mother steered conversation toward safe topics: neighborhood gossip, the children's activities, holiday plans. Whenever the subject veered toward careers or finances, she would quickly interrupt with offers of more food or questions about unrelated matters. I played along, waiting for the right moment. It came after the pumpkin pie was served, when my father poured another scotch, his third of the evening, and my mother began her traditional holiday toast. "I just want to say how blessed we are to have this family together," she began, her voice wavering slightly. "Especially in challenging times. We've always been fortunate to have Heather looking after everyone. She's always been the provider in this family. We're so blessed to have her." The table fell silent as all eyes turned to me, waiting for the hurt to register on my face. Instead, I smiled and said one word: "Perfect." The stunned silence that followed gave me the opening I needed. I stood, retrieving the portfolio from my bag near the door. "Actually, I've been waiting for someone to acknowledge Heather's role as the provider," I said, my voice steady as I returned to the table. "It gives me the perfect opportunity to address something that's been building for 20 years. Cassie," my mother warned, "this is hardly the time for—" "It's exactly the time," I interrupted gently. "When else are we all together with no distractions? When else can we finally speak the truth?" I opened the portfolio and began methodically laying out documents in chronological order. "Let's start at the beginning, shall we? Heather stealing my scholarship essay in high school." I placed the original documents and the dated evidence side by side. "That's ancient history," my father protested weakly. "It's the first in a pattern," I corrected, continuing to arrange documents. "Next, we have Heather's call to my new boss in New York, attempting to sabotage my position before I even started." Heather laughed nervously. "This is ridiculous. You've clearly been collecting perceived slights for years." "It's not healthy, Cassie." "Perceived slights?" I raised an eyebrow, placing Michael Winter's signed statement about her interference before her. "Is that what we're calling attempted professional sabotage now?" I continued chronologically through each betrayal, presenting irrefutable evidence for each. The falsified connection to Warren Phillips, complete with dated emails proving I had secured the client entirely on my own. The documented attempts to solicit my clients using false claims of my endorsement. Statements from nursing home staff about Heather's suspicious visits to our grandmother. And finally, I said, placing the original copy of grandmother's will beside the suspicious amended version, we have the matter of grandmother's estate. I've had experts analyze these documents. The signature on the amendment is questionable at best, potentially fraudulent at worst. The witness Heather provided hasn't been located despite considerable effort. My parents sat in stunned silence, unable to dismiss the overwhelming evidence before them. James looked physically ill, suggesting he may not have been fully aware of Heather's activities. The children had been sent to watch television in another room, sparing them this painful revelation. But the most recent betrayal, I continued, my voice finally betraying emotion, was learning that Heather lost your retirement savings and home equity through her investment scheme, then told you I had advised her on the strategy that failed. I've never given Heather financial advice. We barely speak, as everyone in this room knows perfectly well. I placed statements from my parents' bank showing the mortgage payments I had been making on their behalf for months. You believe Heather is still providing for you, but in reality, I've been quietly preventing foreclosure on your home while she continues to lie to you. My mother's face had gone pale. My father stared at the banking documents, recognition slowly dawning in his eyes. You've been making our mortgage payments? He asked, his voice barely audible. Since August, I confirmed. The bank contacts me directly now. Heather, cornered by evidence she couldn't dismiss, finally dropped her mask of concerned, sisterly affection. Her face hardened, eyes narrowing as she gathered her remaining defenses. So, what exactly are you trying to prove with this little presentation? She demanded. That you've built a successful career? Congratulations. Some of us have been too busy actually supporting our family to keep obsessive records of every perceived slight. I'm not trying to prove anything except the truth, I replied calmly. For 20 years, I've been cast as the lesser sister, less successful, less stable, less deserving of support or acknowledgement. Meanwhile, you've actively worked to maintain that narrative through lies, manipulation, and now financial fraud. I don't expect an apology. I just want the truth acknowledged. The truth? Heather laughed bitterly. The truth is, you've always been jealous of me. You couldn't stand that I was more naturally gifted, more socially adept. So you worked yourself to death trying to compete, and now you want us all to applaud your persistence? Congratulations on your corporate job, Cassie. Some of us aspire to more than just climbing a company ladder. Like what? I asked quietly. Investment fraud? Stealing from our grandmother? Taking our parents' retirement savings and home equity for a scheme that was doomed to fail? The conversation devolved as Heather's carefully constructed facade crumbled completely. Years of suppressed rivalry and resentment erupted as she hurled accusations of jealousy and obsession, while I remained focused on the documented facts before us. My parents watched this exchange in shocked silence until my father finally spoke, his voice uncharacteristically small. Heather, is it true? Did you change your grandmother's will without her full understanding? It was the first time in my memory that he had questioned Heather directly, demanding accountability instead of accepting her narrative without challenge. Her hesitation was answer enough. You don't understand the pressure I've been under, she finally said, deflecting rather than denying. Managing everyone's expectations, maintaining a certain lifestyle. Cassie has always had the luxury of only being responsible for herself. As the confrontation continued, the final revelation landed like a thunderclap. I produced documentation proving I had been financially supporting our parents for months through arrangements with their bank and utility companies. The payments they believed were coming from Heather's recovering investments had actually been coming from me all along. I didn't want to embarrass anyone, I explained, as my mother stared at the evidence in disbelief. I just wanted to ensure you didn't lose your home while Heather's situation resolved itself. My father's eyes filled with tears, the first I'd seen since childhood. We had no idea, he whispered, looking at the statements. Heather told us she was managing the payments from recovered investments. Heather, unable to face the complete collapse of her deceptions, grabbed her coat and stormed out, leaving her husband and children behind in her desperation to escape the truth. The silence that followed was profound, heavy with 20 years of misplaced trust and enabled deception. In the aftermath of Heather's dramatic exit, the dining room remained suspended in stunned silence. James awkwardly gathered their children and followed her, promising my parents he would be in touch soon. Ryan squeezed my hand under the table, a silent affirmation of support in this fragile moment. I hadn't come seeking destruction, only truth. Looking at my parents' devastated expressions, I felt no triumph. Only the weary relief of finally being seen. "I didn't do this for revenge," I said softly, breaking the silence. "I just needed you to know the truth. For 20 years, I've lived with being cast as the lesser daughter, watching you believe Heather's version of reality, no matter how implausible. I needed the facts acknowledged. Just once." My father stared at his hands, unable to meet my gaze. "We never meant to," he began, then stopped, perhaps realizing there was no way to complete that sentence honestly. "I think you did," I replied gently. "Not maliciously, but you created a family dynamic where Heather was the golden child who could do no wrong, and I was the one who needed to be managed and corrected. That dynamic shaped all our lives." My mother wiped tears from her cheeks, her carefully maintained composure finally cracking. "We thought we were being fair," she whispered. "How could we have been so blind?" "Because it was easier," I answered. "It's easier to maintain a comfortable narrative than to question it, especially when the person benefiting from that narrative is actively working to preserve it." The conversation continued late into the night, painful but necessary. For the first time, my parents listened without defending or deflecting. My father, especially, seemed to be seeing me clearly for perhaps the first time in decades. "I'm so sorry, Cassie," he said finally, the words I'd never expected to hear. Not just for the financial situation, but for everything. For not seeing what was happening. For not protecting you. It wasn't a complete recognition of everything I'd experienced, but it was a genuine start, an acknowledgement rather than a dismissal. My mother had a harder time accepting her role, still instinctively trying to defend Heather's actions before catching herself. Years of entrenched patterns wouldn't dissolve in a single night, but the foundation had been irrevocably shaken. We agreed to seek professional help as a family. I set clear boundaries. I would support them financially through this crisis, but our relationship moving forward would be built on honesty and respect, not obligation and martyrdom. They needed to acknowledge their role in enabling Heather's behavior rather than casting themselves solely as victims. Heather herself faced consequences beyond family disapproval. In the months that followed, regulatory investigations into her business practices resulted in civil penalties and a prohibition from working in financial services. Several clients filed lawsuits, and while criminal charges were ultimately avoided through settlements, her professional reputation was destroyed. Our parents sold their too-large suburban home, moving to a comfortable but modest townhouse that better suited their retirement needs. They began learning financial responsibility out of necessity, gradually accepting that Heather had exploited their willingness to believe in her infallibility. 6 months after the confrontation, we attempted the first steps toward a new kind of family relationship. With the guidance of a family therapist, we met in a neutral setting to establish new patterns of interaction. Heather initially refused to participate, but eventually joined separate sessions after her husband made it a condition of their marriage continuing. The process was neither quick nor easy. Old patterns emerged repeatedly, with my mother occasionally slipping into defending Heather or minimizing her actions. My father struggled with guilt, sometimes overcompensating with excessive praise for my accomplishments. Heather oscillated between grudging acknowledgement of some wrongdoing and bitter accusations that I had deliberately destroyed her life out of jealousy. But gradually, incrementally, something new began to emerge from the ashes of our old family dynamic. Not closeness, exactly, but a tentative honesty that had never existed before. My parents began to see me, really see me, perhaps for the first time. Heather began the painful process of confronting her own behavior and the damage it had caused, though her path to genuine accountability would be much longer. For my part, I learned that while I couldn't change the past, I could shape my response to it. The documentation I had so meticulously gathered had served its purpose in revealing the truth, but holding on to it indefinitely would only anchor me to old wounds. Gradually, I began to release the need to prove my worth through achievement or validation from my family. A year later, we gathered for another Thanksgiving, this one deliberate and thoughtfully arranged in a restaurant to avoid the loaded associations of my parents' former home. The conversation was sometimes awkward but largely authentic. Heather and I maintained a careful civility, neither pretending closeness nor falling into outright hostility. My parents asked genuine questions about my life and work, listening to the answers with new attentiveness. As we finished our meal, my father raised his glass in a toast very different from those of previous years. To truth, he said simply, and to the courage it takes to speak it, hear it, and live by it. I touched my glass to his, feeling the weight of that simple acknowledgement. The family we were building now would never be the idealized version I had longed for as a child. It would be more complicated, more honest, and ultimately more real. The journey had taught me that true family isn't defined by blood or obligation, but by mutual respect and honesty. The relationships worth keeping are those that see us clearly and value us authentically. Sometimes those relationships can be rebuilt from damaged foundations. Sometimes they must be found elsewhere or created anew. My ultimate victory wasn't in exposing Heather's deceptions or even in finally being acknowledged by my parents. It was in breaking free from the need for their validation, in building a life of integrity and truth, regardless of whether they could recognize its worth. I'd like to know if you've ever experienced family dynamics where one person always seemed to get preferential treatment. How did you handle it? Did you confront the situation or find other ways to cope? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life experiences. Your support means everything as we build this community of truth-tellers together. Thank you for listening to my story. And remember, sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is simply speak our truth, even when our voice shakes.